She was just a nurse coming off another grueling night shift. Exhausted, running late, clutching her worn-out backpack, she thought she was boarding a cheap flight to Atlantic City. Instead, she walked onto a private jet bound for Paris. And sitting inside was a billionaire who hadn't let anyone close in years. What happened next would change both of their lives in ways neither could have imagined. Elena Morris wasn't looking for miracles. She wasn't even looking for rest. At 29, she measured her life in 12-hour shifts, ICU alarms, and the quiet exhaustion of surviving day after day. Her parents were gone. Her father taken by a stroke, her mother by winters too heavy to carry alone. That left Elena raising her younger brother Marcus, just 10 at the time. She left med school behind, picked up 2 jobs, and did everything she could to make sure he had food on the table and a chance at an education. Her days were filled with fluorescent lights and the smell of antiseptic. Her lunches were cold rice with sesame salt, eaten quickly behind a supply cabinet. Her shoes were patched with duct tape, her dreams pushed aside to cover rent, and her brother's tuition. For 10 years, her life was reduced to 2 things: her patients and her brother's future. That morning was supposed to be the same. She rushed through the terminal half awake, eyes stinging, body aching. Her boarding pass crumpled in her hand. She followed the signs to Gate 7C. The uniformed attendant greeted her politely. "Miss Morris?" She nodded automatically, not questioning why there were no lines, no crowd, no chaos. Just a quiet hallway leading to a sleek jet gleaming on the tarmac. She hesitated for only a second, then her legs gave out before her doubts could. She climbed the steps, stepped into a cabin that looked like a dream, and sank into a cream leather seat. The last thing she remembered was clutching her backpack like armor. When her eyes opened again, she was in the air, and sitting across from her was a man with sharp eyes, a gray suit, and the kind of stillness that made him look untouchable. Damian Carter was not a man used to surprises. He was the kind of figure you saw on Forbes covers and in headlines about billion-dollar deals. Tall, reserved, his gestures precise as clockwork. His reputation was colder still. After the death of his best friend and business partner years ago, he disappeared from the spotlight, immersing himself in work. They called him the Machinea Man who never smiled, never wasted words, never let anything crack the surface. Yet when Elena realized her mistake and stammered out that she was supposed to be flying to Atlantic City, Damian didn't throw her off his jet. He didn't call security or even raise his voice. He just studied her quietly, a flicker of curiosity in his expression, then said calmly, "This plane is going to Paris." Elena panicked. She pulled up her confirmation email and realized the truth-wrong gate, wrong airport code, wrong everything. She flushed with embarrassment. "I can't be here," she whispered. "I don't belong here." But Damian simply leaned back, eyes steady, and replied, "You're already here." It wasn't kindness, not exactly. It was recognition. Something about her exhaustion, the way she carried herself, made him pause, and instead of sending her back, he let her stay. He arranged for her to be booked on a commercial flight home once they landed, but until then, he told her, she could rest. For the first time in years, Elena let herself sink into a seat without apology. When the jet touched down in Paris, the sun was melting gold across the rooftops. Elena should have been terrified, out of place, ready to run. But Damian had already arranged everything. VIP clearance through customs, a black car waiting at the curb, a hotel that looked more like a palace than anything she had ever stepped foot in. She followed him in silence, her heart thudding, her eyes wide. The marble floors gleamed. The concierge greeted him by name, and when she reached her suite, she nearly broke down. Lavender tea waiting on the nightstand, slippers by the bathroom door, fresh flowers by the balcony, which opened to a skyline she had only seen in pictures. It wasn't just the luxury. It was the quiet. For the first time in years, no one was asking her for anything. No monitors, no bills, no weight of survival pressing down. She sat on the bed, touched the crisp sheets, and cried quietly. Not messy tears, just the release of a woman who had been carrying too much for too long. That night, she stood in front of the rooftop doors, unsure if she had the courage to join him for dinner. But curiosity, or maybe hope, pulled her forward. She wore the simple black dress the concierge had arranged, nothing extravagant, but enough to make her feel less invisible. On the rooftop, Paris glittered in the distance, jazz floated through hidden speakers, and Damien stood waiting with 2 glasses in hand. "Didn't think you'd come," he said. She gave a nervous smile. "Didn't think I would either." And so it began. They sat together, sipping quietly. Her sparkling water, his amber drink, and for the first time, Elena noticed that silence with him didn't feel awkward. It felt like breathing. He asked her about her work, and when she admitted she was an ICU nurse, his gaze softened. He told her about his friend Mark, the man who had built their company with him, the man he lost to sudden heart failure. "We created systems to help hospitals save lives," Damien said quietly. But when it mattered most, they couldn't save him. Elena understood that silence, the silence left after loss. She told him about her parents, about how grief was a luxury she couldn't afford, how she had just kept going because someone had to. And for the first time, someone saw her not as a machine, not as a caretaker, but as a woman carrying a weight she never put down. He looked at her steadily and said, "You're not a woman people forget. You walk like the world sits on your shoulders, but you smile like you're still choosing hope." She had no reply, just the sound of her own heartbeat finally slowing. The next morning, Elena expected awkwardness, maybe even dismissal. Instead, she found a note with breakfast waiting outside her door. "No meetings today. Thought we could see the city. No pressure." D. It wasn't a command or an obligation. It was an invitation. And Elena realized something startling. Damien wasn't making room for her because he had to. He was choosing to. They spent the day walking through the city, sneakers on cobblestones, scarves against the breeze. They had no itinerary, no guidebook. They stopped for powdered sugar pastries, listened to jazz under a bridge, stumbled into bookshops and art galleries. In a quiet gallery, Elena paused in front of a painting of a girl at a window, her face turned to the light, her expression weary but waiting. "She looks like she's waiting for something," Damien said softly. Elena nodded. Or someone. And in the silence that followed, she realized she wasn't talking about the painting anymore. At a crooked little bookstore, she picked up a worn copy of Baldwin's Notes of a Native Son. Her father had made her read it when she was too young to understand, then again when she was grown enough to. She spoke of her parents with pride, not just pain, and Damien listened the way no one else had. By the time they sat at a cafe at sunset, she no longer felt like she was trespassing in someone else's world. For the first time, Paris felt like hers too. That night, back at the rooftop, the atmosphere was different. Gone was the cautious curiosity of strangers. This time, they sat like two people peeling back layers slowly, unwrapping truths neither had spoken aloud in years. They talked about dreams deferred, Alina's wish to open a small bookstore cafe someday, a place without beeping monitors, where the only urgency was a fresh pot of coffee. She admitted how impossible it felt with student loans, rent, and her brother's tuition weighing her down. Damien listened, nodding like he had expected that answer long before she said it. And then, almost unexpectedly, he shared his own abandoned path. He told her how he had once planned to be a teacher, how he had won a scholarship to Boston University, how he and Mark dropped out to build something from scratch. He told her about the luck, the investors, the rise, the billions. And then he told her how it all hollowed out the night Mark collapsed. Elena didn't fill the silence with sympathy. She just sat with him in it, understanding that some grief doesn't need fixing, only witnessing. When the night grew colder, he looked at her quietly and said, "You're not a woman people forget, Elena." She blinked, stunned. But the words didn't feel like flattery. They felt like truth. The following morning, Elena tried to steel herself. She told herself it was time to go home, back to the life she knew, back to her responsibilities. But as she sat across from him at breakfast, sipping coffee that actually tasted like something, she heard herself say yes when he asked if she might stay one more day. Just one more. They wandered again, walking by the river, slipping into quiet neighborhoods where balconies overflowed with flowers and violinists played wistful melodies on corners. They laughed at ridiculous hospital stories, like the night she had to sprint down a hall in socks to stop a runaway patient. And for the first time, she realized how much she had missed her own laughter. That evening, as they lingered in the hotel lobby, Damien cleared his throat, awkward for the first time since she met him. "I have a meeting tonight," he said, "but would you have dinner with me after? Rooftop again, or wherever you'd be most comfortable?" There was no pressure in his voice, no undertone, just a man asking. And for the first time in years, Elena felt brave enough to say yes. Dinner was quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that filled the air with recognition. Elena admitted things she had never said out loud. That she had been raising Marcus since she was 23, that she had dropped out of med school to keep him afloat, that sometimes she forgot the sound of her own voice because she spent her days speaking only to patients who never answered. Damien listened, really listened, his eyes steady, his silence gentle. Then, when she asked a question she didn't mean, "Do you think someone like me deserves to sit here?" he leaned in and said, "If you don't, then no one does." The waiter had only set a menu in front of Damien, ignoring her. Damien hadn't raised his voice or scolded the man. Instead, he had simply touched Elena's wrist lightly and told the waiter, "I don't know what to order unless she orders first." For the first time, Elena felt seen. Not for her sacrifices, not for her competence, but for herself. And when the evening ended, when the night breeze swept across the rooftop, Damien leaned in, not demanding, not urgent. Just a quiet closeness that made her heartbeat stumble. Elena stepped back softly, but not out of fear, out of certainty. "I don't want to be someone you remember for one night," she whispered. He nodded slowly. "I understand. I can wait." And she believed him. The next morning, Elena made a choice. She knocked on his door, held up 2 fingers, and said simply, "2 more days." His smile spread slowly, like something rising from a place deeper than charm. "I'll clear my calendar," he said. Those 2 days became quiet magic. They rented bicycles and rode through the park, laughing at how ungraceful he was when his chain slipped. They ducked into a jazz club where no one spoke English, but everyone understood rhythm. They took a cooking class from an elderly woman who scolded Damien mercilessly for chopping garlic wrong, and Elena laughed until her cheeks hurt. And in between, they revealed pieces of themselves. Elena told him how she had once broken down months after her father's funeral. Not at the gravesite, but in the middle of a grocery store aisle, staring at laundry detergent. Damien told her about the first time someone called him a fraud after Mark's death, and how, for a moment, he almost believed it. They weren't trading confessions. They were building something. Layer by layer, word by word, like laying bricks they hadn't realized they carried. But magic has a clock, and reality always waits. On the second rooftop evening, Elena admitted what she had been trying not to. "I have to go back the day after, tomorrow," she said. "I know," he replied. She looked out at the skyline. "But I don't want to forget this." "You won't," he said. "You don't know that." And then, for the first time, he leaned forward, closing the distance just enough that his words landed like a vow. "You're not the one who stumbled into my life, Elena. I'm the one who's been waiting." It wasn't a line. It wasn't charm. It was the kind of truth that makes goodbye unbearable. That night, when she fell asleep beneath the soft linen sheets, she thought about all the times she had left before anyone had a chance to ask her to stay. This time, she wasn't ready to walk away. Eventually, though, Paris had to end. Elena boarded a commercial flight back to New York with nothing but her old backpack, her folded green dress tucked neatly inside, and memories she wasn't ready to explain. Back in her small apartment above the laundromat, Marcus hugged her tightly. "Who goes to Paris by accident?" he teased. But when he saw her face, the joking softened. He knew something had shifted. Life returned quickly. ICU shifts, beeping monitors, impatient families, exhaustion that wrapped itself around her bones. But inside, something was different. She found herself staring in the mirror after shifts, whispering, "You're still here? Aren't you?" Not to her reflection exactly, but to the Elena who had walked through Paris unafraid, who had been chosen without having to earn it. And for the first time, she wanted to learn how to keep that version of herself alive. For a while, it seemed as if Paris had given her a new skin, but old doubts still lingered like shadows. One night, alone in her suite, Elena typed his full name into her phone. The search results hit like a tidal wave. Damien Carter, billionaire under 40, net worth over $12 billion, owner of multiple companies, a man with headlines and a reputation larger than life. She stared at his face in glossy magazine portraits and realized just how much he hadn't told her. He had never introduced himself with his title, never listed his empire, never worn his power like armor. And yet the truth was undeniable. She was a nurse who patched her shoes with tape, and he was a man the world called untouchable. Her stomach knotted. Was she just a curiosity? A brief distraction for someone who could have anything? The next day, when they sat together at breakfast, she didn't hide the tension. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked. Her voice wasn't angry, just quiet, demanding honesty. Damien sat, his coffee down. His eyes didn't waver. "Because I wanted someone to see me without looking at the name behind me." And then, after a long silence, he added something he hadn't told anyone outside his circle. "My mother was black. My father's family never accepted her. They called me a mistake before I ever had a chance to prove myself. Every dollar I earned, every company I built, none of it erased that weight. I didn't want you to know me as that man. I wanted you to know me as just me." For the first time, Elena saw not the billionaire, not the machine, but the boy who had carried rejection like a shadow. It didn't take long before the outside world intruded. They had ducked into a quiet cafe tucked in an alleyway. Elena sipping hot cocoa, Damien telling her stories about winters in Paris. And then, without warning, the door creaked open. A man stepped inside, and camera flashes exploded against the glass. Damien moved instinctively, blocking her from the window, but the damage was done. Elena froze, her heart pounding. She had seen enough news to know what happened when people like him were photographed with people like her. "The world you live in," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's watching." He reached across the table and held her hand firmly. "They can look, but they don't get to decide for us." But Elena wasn't sure. It wasn't just about the cameras. It was about the old fear clawing its way back. The fear of not belonging, of being swallowed by a world that had never made room for her. That night, back in her room, she packed slowly, folded the borrowed sweater, zipped her backpack, and prepared to walk away before the weight of his life crushed her own. When she stood at the doorway, Damien didn't stop her. He leaned against the frame, eyes steady, but distant. He didn't beg, didn't plead. He just let her choose. Because sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone walk away. Elena left the hotel with her heart pounding and tears threatening, but she told herself it was the only way. She couldn't be a tourist in someone else's life forever. At the airport, she sat on a cold bench with her ticket in hand. Her phone buzzed Marcus's face, filling the screen. "You're coming home?" he asked, relief and worry tangled in his voice. She nodded, but her lips wouldn't form words. He studied her face carefully. And then, softly, he asked, "Do you really want to live the same life again?" It was such a simple question, but it split her heart wide open. Elena stood near the boarding gate, ticket clenched in her hand, emptiness rising in her chest. The loudspeaker called for boarding. People shuffled past. She took a step forward, her body moving on autopilot. And then she saw him. Damien, breathless, hair disheveled, his shirt untucked. He had run through the airport like a man with nothing left to lose. He didn't say a word, didn't explain himself. He just stepped forward, reached out, and pulled her into his arms. Not tightly, not forcefully. Just enough to say, "Even if you leave, I'll still be here. You still belong somewhere safe." Elena closed her eyes, and for the first time in years, she let someone else hold the weight she carried. He didn't take her back to the hotel. Instead, he drove her to a small house just outside the city. White-painted wood, a red-tiled roof, bougainvillea vines curling along the gate. No guards, no staff, no golden chandeliers. Just a home. "This is where I live when no one's watching," he said softly. Inside, the kitchen was simple, the dining table built for two. The scent of old wood lingered in the air. Elena placed her backpack by the door and realized something. Love doesn't always need to be grand. Sometimes it only needs a space quiet enough for you to breathe. They cooked dinner together. Damien fumbled with a knife, crushing tomatoes instead of slicing them. Elena laughed for the first time that day, took the knife from him, and teased, "You're about to murder dinner." In that little kitchen, there was no billionaire, no nurse, just two people moving around each other with ease, soft jazz playing from an old radio, smiles passed across the table. And for the first time, Elena felt not dazzled or overwhelmed. She felt like she belonged. Later that night, they sat on the porch beneath a shared blanket, hot tea warming their hands. Damien pulled a folded slip of paper from his wallet and handed it to her. The ink was faded, the handwriting slanted. "It's the last thing my mother gave me," he said. She wrote, "Love takes courage, not conditions." Elena's eyes stung as she read it. The words felt like something her own mother might have whispered if she'd had more time. Damien looked out at the night. My mother knew one day I'd fall for someone the world wouldn't approve of. She wanted me to remember I didn't need anyone else's permission. Elena leaned her head against his shoulder. For the first time, the fear inside her loosened. Because maybe love wasn't about timing or perfection. Maybe it was about courage.